This is the top 10 positive male role models on my mind right now. I want to be very clear before we launch into this list that none of the people on this list are perfect. Some of them aren't even necessarily that great. No one actually is. The very idea of role models is a little bit ridiculous, and you should pattern yourself on a lot of different things. Role models and, things that you've learned and aspirational. It shouldn't just be about one person. So understand that there's going to be flaws or even terrible things that some of these people have been done. That's just baked into it. And these are 10 people that are on my mind right now. They are not reflective of everyone's life experience. Basically, all of them are American, which is ridiculous when you think about how many great role models there are around the world. This is just what's in my mind right now, and we could make 1,000 of these sorts of lists, and probably will make more in the future. So I would love to know who you think should be on this list that is not. Put it down below, and maybe it'll make it on the next edition of it. But starting off, my number 10 is going to be probably one of the people that, maybe 20 years ago might have been on this sort of list. And bear in mind, some of these are fictional characters, because I am who I am. Is James Bond, but not obviously everything about him. There's a lot of toxicity there. I do think, though, we can draw specific things from these people. So he keeps in good shape. He believes in service to country, which I think can be a good thing in pursuit of justice, not blindly. And he does not do it blindly. He is willing to go rogue when he feels like the country is not doing the right thing. And then mainly it's fashion. I think that we do need to do a little bit more to dress it up a little bit, I think that he's a great example of that. Whether it's in formal wear or a little bit more casual stuff, he just always looks really good, But beyond that, don't take relationship advice or anything. He's far too violent, clearly. There's some issues with James Bond, but I think that one of the great things about, in theory, if you have a young kid that you're trying to explain these role models to, focus on the good things, but also acknowledge the bad things. A role model doesn't have to mean you want to be like that person. You're learning something about people by looking at these people. So anyway, some of them not as troubling, thankfully, including my number 9. Terry Crews. So Terry Crews, I think, deserves to be on a list like this for a lot of different reasons. Both for things about him, but also about some of his characters, including his character on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Terry Crews is one of the best examples, although there's one or two others on this list, that is a combination of obvious strength and not being terrified of being vulnerable, being sensitive, including in his characters. Being willing to talk openly about surviving sexual assault, being willing to be very supportive of women during Me Too. He shows that none of this means that you're not strong. In fact, the case could be made that if you can't do those sorts of things, that's a sign of strength. Being willing to be vulnerable and sensitive and caring about others. Those can be masculine qualities, and I think Terry Crews shows that off very well. Again, both in his personal life and also in some of his roles. So I would put him there at number 9 for that. Focusing in a little bit more, my number 8 is going to be Keanu Reeves. I think Keanu Reeves is very similar in that you can both pattern yourself after some of his characters, but also just him. If you, want to pattern yourself after John Wick and be, a great protector to your dog and stuff, I think that's fine. But Keanu Reeves is just, I don't know, I wonder to what extent he's done a great job of not revealing too much about himself, but everything that has come out, and I don't mean just through him, I mean people who've worked with him, implies that he's a very decent, kind, nice person. And he has been famous for many decades. He has been rich for many decades. Being humble and nice after all that is an aspirational thing. And the fact that, I just a couple months ago, I think, saw that he was in, I think, the UK, and he was at a bar, and some people met him and said that they were going to have their wedding, and he said he would go, and then he went. He just showed up. He's just a decent person. I remember reading that, after The Matrix, he, bought expensive motorcycles for every one of the stunt people or something like that, because he actually valued their work, and very often their work is ignored. It's just a decent person. Just be decent. Why can't that be a great quality to aspire to? Number 7 is going to be a more complicated one, but it is Tyrion Lannister. Now, don't pattern yourself after everything about Tyrion Lannister. He did kill his dad, and bunch of other people, and he's done a lot of bad stuff, but he didn't allow the hatred and bigotry in the world to get him too down. He came up with this philosophy of using his own perceived weaknesses as armor. And he talks about that very early on in the show, and focused on his strengths. He's a very clever person, likes absorbing knowledge and using it, so he did that. He greets the world, the good parts and the bad parts, with a sense of humor, I think. And he actually, despite growing up in a family that gave him all of the incentive in the world to be a selfish, cruel person, could feel a sense of obligation to those he had been put into a position of authority over. He actually wanted to make the city, of King's Landing or the world a better place. He didn't always accomplish that, and he did a lot of bad things from time to time. But I think that if you mine it, I think there's some stuff to learn there. So Tyrion Lannister. I might be biased because I just really like the character, but anyway, I think there are some things you could learn there. Number 6 is going to be The Rock. Again, I don't know everything about him. It's possible that politically I might not agree with him on some things, but he at least keeps that to himself. So The Rock, I think, is a motivational figure for a lot of different reasons. He's been able to transition from multiple different phases of his career, growing at every step along the way, combining obvious, physically, he's doing amazing work there. I think that that's important for people to learn and take care of yourself and all that. But also combining it with his interest in a lot of different businesses that he runs simultaneously. Choosing, I think, pretty well what roles to take in movies. And I don't know, I like his vibe of just being kind of, again, a little bit nice in the way of Keanu Reeves, but also with a sense of humor. I think he could fill that sort of classic movie action star thing, but with a little bit more of a sense of humility and humor, I think. I think it's a more modern spin on that sort of thing than you would have gotten from an action star of his caliber back in the 80s and 90s. So I like that about him. He's really good in the Fast and the Furious movies too. Anyway, let's move to number 5. And this is where it gets a little bit more difficult, but because there's some great people out there. But I'm going to put Mr. Rogers. I just recently was watching some old Mr. Rogers interviews again, in the last week, including his testimony before, I believe it was the Senate, to get funding for public broadcasting. And there have not been a lot of people like Mr. Rogers in the world, not that have been able to maintain public personas. He is what I've been saying about The Rock or about Keanu Reeves and about Terry Crews, but times 1,000. Not just being willing to be nice and, vulnerable and all of that, but actively encouraging every day more and more people, including kids, to be that way, to not shy away from that stuff, to not be afraid of their emotions. I think that there are so many lessons that kids could learn from him. I wish that we still had a Mr. Rogers. I wonder sometimes if a Mr. Rogers could exist. Is there someone like that in TV? I guess he would be making content for kids. I probably wouldn't know who it was. Are there people like that on TikTok or something? But anyway, talk about decency. Just living your entire life, your entire career, not being focused on just making money and acquiring things, but on trying to make kids feel special, feel loved, to set them on, the right path for the rest of their life. He's a great guy. Number 4. Very different sort of person. This person did have a lot of ambitions. And again, grain of salt, but Barack Obama. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I disagree with Barack Obama on. There's a lot of areas where I thought he could have done a lot of good as president that he did not do. And then there's things like the drone strikes and everything where we get into the area of literally perpetrating war crimes. But again, none of these people on this list are intended to be taken whole cloth without any critical thought necessary. There are things, though, about Barack Obama that I think could be part of a good role model for kids. Again, being able to balance obvious ambition without being vicious and disgusting and cruel like a lot of other politicians are. He's a person who genuinely seems to care about his family in the way that Republicans always say they want their politicians to, but none of them really seem to. And I think more important than anything in his personal life, He served to inspire a lot of people to care about politics and to believe that it is possible for politics to actually help. He then went on as president to undercut a lot of those feelings, but along the way, I think brought a lot of people in, including me. His speech in 2004 at the DNC was one of the first big political things that really drew me into politics. His 2008 run for the presidency, for a lot of people, that drew me into. Again, it was undercut to some extent, but it was inspirational, and he did accomplish some great things. Not nearly as many as he could have. But again, none of these are perfect people. Don't pattern everything about your life on these people or you'll be a weirdo. But anyway, yeah, Barack Obama, obviously making history as the first black president in American history. And then after that, I don't know, I do think he could be a little bit more involved in what's going on, especially considering that he does still have a good approval rating. I feel like he could be helping to accomplish some good, and I don't love that he weighed in 2020, although we can't be surprised that he backed the guy that he chose as VP. But anyway, just seeming to be decent since then. Just a decent guy. I do think that decency is a value that isn't stressed enough in this sort of thing. But anyway, now we get to the top three, and these are the even bigger hitters. Number 3 for me is going to be, this is so tough, 3 and 2. Have you guessed it yet? It's John Oliver. John Oliver is actually one of my main role models. Again, not for everything. I don't know a ton about him. But what I know about his work, what he has chosen to make his life about, is being curious about things, being willing to learn, and then teach about things in pursuit of, I think, values that are positive, that would make the world a better place. I think that he deserves a lot of credit for caring about and talking about topics before they become topical, before they become something that everybody else is talking about, like getting out in front of these topics in advance and causing people to question things that they've never thought deeply about before. Doing it all with a sense of humor, caring enough about the topic to both be educational, but also knowing that you cannot just bludgeon people over the head with information, a lot of it which is serious and dark, or you'll drive them away. He knows enough to care about that. And so he makes the life of caring about politics and being invested in it fun. And that is important if you want people to be a part of the process for longer than just a few years. There's a lot that I could say about John Oliver, but I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think that the show, I just watched his episode of his show last night about the monarchy, and he's willing to question things and he's willing to put himself out there. I'm sure that there's areas that we disagree on politically, but I don't think a ton, honestly. After the last few years, I think quite a bit overlaps. I think he deserves a lot of credit, and I hope that someday people look back on all the work that he and his team have done and that he gets the credit he deserves. Granted, he's getting Emmys and stuff like that, so he's getting some recognition, but yeah, he's self-deprecating, and I don't know. I think that there is a strength there that isn't often defined as male strength, but I do think that John Oliver exhibits it. Number 2 is going to be Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I don't know how many people, if they were thinking of good male role models, oh, Bernie. But no, I very much think so. Really think about it. I understand that he's old or whatever, and he has white hair, and he seems a bit crotchety and grumpy or whatever. But what has he done with his life? What he has done is he figured out what he believed, okay? Who was being held back, who was doing the holding back, and he has spent decade after decade after decade fighting for the people who desperately needed help. Being willing to speak actual truths to power, despite being close to power, knowing that he's going to be undercut and attacked as a result of it, but still being willing to do it year after year after year after year for literally decades. Okay, and honestly, when he decided to run in 2016, he was elevated a bunch as a result of that, got a massive fan base, but he had been doing that for so long, and he would have continued doing it if he had somehow not run, or if his run in 2016 had never really kicked off and really picked up. He would have just kept doing it anyway, because it wasn't about his ambitions. It was about actually accomplishing these things, improving the country, and being willing to, I'm sure that he would have loved to have already retired or whatever, to spend time with his family or something. But he's out there, in advance of the midterms, he was doing rally after rally after rally, day after day. And he's willing to help out candidates that aren't his preferred people, helping out people that have attacked him and his movement if that's the best possible thing that we can get right then. And if it's not next time, he will go back to pushing for that. And so I think he deserves endless credit for bringing in a whole generation of people into American politics and setting a new progressive movement, like on its path. He's, again, like all these, not perfect or anything, but I think a great role model for those reasons. And my number one is going to be, and this is highly specific, and I understand that you might not know this person, it's going to be my dad, okay? Feel free to insert your own, I guess, if you must. But yeah, you guys never met my dad because unfortunately my dad passed away many years ago, unfortunately. My dad passed away before I ever got into this career field. He never knew me as a person talking about politics or anything like that, and that is one of the great regrets of my life. If you still have your dad, appreciate them while you have them. I'm very jealous of you who do. But my dad was a great dad to 3 sons, and that was what his life was, basically. He worked to provide for us, to take all of the, the difficulty and the toxicity that comes from 3 sons similar in age, and he just worked at jobs that I'm sure were not what he would have preferred to be doing. He worked printing presses for years and years, struggling with health problems, and he just did it. And he provided opportunities for us. He eventually struggled for years with cancer. He didn't complain. And you're allowed to, by the way. Again, that's vulnerability, and I think that's a good thing. But he just bore it and worked as long as he could. He was a great dad, a great provider. He didn't force his way of thinking on us, but he was always there to teach us things if we wanted to. He was a sort of classic outdoorsman, and was always willing to expose us to, whether it's doing archery or fishing or building a boat with his bare hands. Just that sort of classic dad stuff that I'm sure there are versions of that will continue on in the future, but I don't know. It was just like a very pre-internet sort of daddom. I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot from him, and I can only imagine if I had been lucky enough to continue to have him to the present day, how much more I could learn from him. So to some extent, it's a little bit hypothetical. I have all of the memories of my dad and what he provided for me and what he taught me, and then I can fill in the blanks for how much I wish that I had him, and I think that he would have continued being a great role model up until the present day. So anyway, it isn't my intent to end this on a down note, but I will say that if you do still have your dad or your parents or whoever's filling these roles for you as a parent, definitely appreciate it while you can, because you never know when you're going to lose it, unfortunately. But anyway, like I said, this is just 10, almost randomly chosen. There are so many great people in science and academia and sports and music and politics and all of that, let alone regular people who I might not know. I am very curious about who you think should be on this list and for what reason. Again, many of these people on this list are not here for all of what they are. They're here to learn specific values from, specific lessons from. And so if you have examples of that, I would love to find out more. So you can post those down below. If you have ideas for future top 10 lists, I have one more solo top 10 list I'm going to be doing before Francesca returns. So you can post that as well. And I will see you soon.